Hey guys, how you doing? I'm back today for another Vinyl Finds video. I've got probably a little over 20 albums that are mainly online purchases from the last month or so, and some of these I won't be saying a lot about because quite frankly I haven't heard all of them, so I'm unfamiliar with the music on them, so I'll just say a little bit about each one. So to start off, I've been really enjoying the series that Dean over at Grandma's Handbag has had on his top 100 albums, and you know, when I see Dean show his installments, you know, I'm reminded of how great certain albums are that I have on CD, and then it kind of gives me that little extra push that I needed to get them on vinyl. And so this first one is Spiritualized, the classic Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space. So Dean showed this. I had this back in the day, or still have it on CD, and I have always meant to get it on vinyl, and finally I guess seeing one of his last few videos, he showed this album. So this is a 2 LP set. It's a repress on Plain Records, if you can see in the bottom corner down there. Sometimes Plain Records doesn't get you know, a lot of praise. It gets some criticism. The only albums that I'm aware of that I have on Plain Records are this Spiritualized and a My Bloody Valentine Isn't Anything, and I have no complaints, but again, I have nothing to compare those pressings to, but you know, I've been pretty happy so far. So this is a double LP of this classic album. One of them is just plain white. The other is sort of a blue smoky vinyl, if you can kind of see that. So again, pretty happy with getting these, and long overdue. I've been wanting this on vinyl for quite some time now. So of course the leader of Spiritualized is Jason Pierce, who was originally in the band Spacemen 3. The other half of Spacemen 3 is Sonic Boom, or Pete Kember, otherwise I guess his solo project known as Spectrum. I'm unfamiliar with most of Sonic Boom's solo stuff. This album is Highs, Lows, and Heavenly Blows, and I got this after being on a bit of a Spacemen 3 kick, again from watching Dean's videos, and this was the highest ranking Spectrum album, so I decided to get this. This is much more I'm going to say electronic than either Spiritualized or Spacemen 3, but still quite excellent. Still some droning on here. There is still some sort of Velvet's influenced material on here, but to a lesser extent that I would say than the Spacemen 3 stuff. And then the originating band, Spacemen 3, The Perfect Prescription. I've had this on CD for many years, finally got it on vinyl. This is heavily Velvet Underground influenced. I've heard Spacemen 3 be described as a cross between the Stooges and the Velvet Underground, and I would agree with that. Throw in a little Hawkwind in here because it's got some space rock elements. Maybe a little MC5 as well, but out of all those associated albums that I've shown, the Spiritualized, the Spectrum, and this Spacemen 3, I would say this is my favorite of the bunch. This has the distinction of being, from what I read, Dean Wareham of Galaxy 500 and Luna fame. This is apparently his favorite album of all time. And a record that just came in today, it's still not even out of the wrapper, P.P. Arnold, The New Adventures of P.P. Arnold. This is being touted as her first album of new material in 51 years. P.P. Arnold, I came to know her as a vocalist who did some accompanying vocals on the Small Faces Tin Soldier song. And from what I've also read, she's spent some time with Ike and Tina Turner. So this particular album is a double LP of new material. It's supposed to sound very 60s soul sounding, which is perfect. It's been produced by Steve Craddock of Ocean Color Scene. He's the guitarist from Ocean Color Scene, has also played with in Paul Weller's band for many years, and Paul Weller apparently has wrote a couple of tracks for this album. So really looking forward to listening to this. Another album that came this morning still in the wrapper, a classic from the 90s, Pavement, Wowie Zowie. This is Pavement's third album. I was a little disappointed with this album back in the 90s because my introduction to Pavement was their Crooked Rain album, and I didn't like this one as much, but then I've come to love it over the years. So finally got this on vinyl. It's a double LP, but I think it's only 3 sides of material. The 4th side is sort of a blank side, I suppose. Speaking of Crooked Rain, I finally got that as well. This is a single LP. This is one of my favorite albums of the 90s. This is from 94, I believe. Has the big hit, or for Pavement, big hit, Cut Your Hair. You guys will probably also know Gold Sounds and Range Life from this album. This is, like I said, one of my favorite albums of the 90s, and definitely my favorite Pavement album. Speaking of the 90s, another big favorite album of mine from the 90s that I've been waiting a while to get on vinyl, Portishead and their debut album, Dummy. You guys will probably know the songs Sour Times and Glory Box from this. Excellent pressing of this. Got this fairly cheap, around $20 on Amazon, and then with a gift card that I had, I only ended up paying a little over $4 for this. This is excellent. I've been playing this tons since getting it a couple of weeks ago. An absolute classic trip-hop album, probably my favorite trip-hop album of all time. And affiliated with Pavement is the band Silver Jews. And you can see on the back there we've got Steve Malkmus and Bob Nastanovich from Pavement, and the other dude who's the leader of Silver Jews, David Berman. He unfortunately passed away in the last week or two. He suffered from depression, I guess, for many years, and had attempted suicide many years ago, and his cause of death this time around was linked to a suicide. So I had ordered this album called Starlight Walker, which is the Silver Jews debut album, actually before he had passed away, and then while looking up some other stuff, I read the story of that, and he had formed a new band called Purple Mountains, and he was about to go on tour literally in the next week, just before his death. So some very sad news. This is very similar to Pavement, a little bit more lo-fi, indie, a little ramshackle at times. A lot of guest vocals on this, or accompanying lead vocals from Steve Malkmus from Pavement, who was an official member of the Silver Jews along with Bob Nastanovich. But make no mistake, Dave Berman was the leader of the Silver Jews, and really their own the lone member throughout the career of the Silver Jews, with other people coming and going. I had American Water, which is another excellent Silver Jews album, probably better than this one, that had a lot of input as well from Steve and Bob from Pavement. And then another 90s favorite of mine, Teenage Fan Club and their album 13. This was the follow-up to the massively successful Bandwagon-esque album that I've shown before, and you guys know I'm a big fan of that. This was very similar sounding to Bandwagon-esque, probably not as good in terms of the songwriting, but this is easily my second favorite Teenage Fan Club album after Bandwagon-esque. Another favorite band of mine that I've shown many records from before is King Crimson. This is something that's called the Crimson Project. And as you can see the membership on the back there, it involves three members or former members of King Crimson: Adrian Belew, Pat Mastelletto on drums, and Tony Levin on bass and stick. And this Crimson project puts together Adrian Belew's power trio with Julie Black, who's the bass player there on the front. Adrian Belew's power trio along with Tony Levin's trio called the Stickmen. And together they form the Crimson Project, live in Tokyo. Double LP of this band doing mainly 80s King Crimson tracks from, you know, the era that Adrian Belew was involved in the band. I think there's a couple of older tracks on here, Red and Lark's Tongue and Aspect Part 2 that the band does. So if you're a King Crimson fan, I've been waiting for this to be reissued on vinyl, and it finally was in this last month. Still haven't spun this, but I'm quite familiar with how this sounds. And again, if you're a King Crimson fan, especially from the period in the 80s, this is a must-get. It comes along with the CD version of the album. A band that I've been having very little luck finding out there in the wild is Buffalo Springfield. I did get their third album called Last Time Around probably a few months ago. And while I like Neil Young quite a bit, I'm lesser of a fan of Buffalo Springfield. But finally, some old Buffalo Springfield got reissued, so I got their first album, the debut album. And I also got their second album, which is their most popular, Buffalo Springfield Again. So now I have all the studio albums along with a best of collection. So really happy to complete that Buffalo Springfield collection. I saw a video probably a couple months ago where Sam the Vinyl Douche showed this album, the Walker Brothers, Night Flights. This is a Walker Brothers reunion album. I believe it's from '78. The first side has 4 songs from Scott Walker, and then over the remaining tracks, it's the other 2 Walker Brothers who do lead vocals. The first 4 songs are easily the best on this album, but the other songs are pretty good as well. To me, this does sound quite a bit like and influenced by Berlin era Bowie, and Scott Walker's vocals and Bowie's vocals have always sort of been mentioned in the same breath as being sort of similar to one another. And I know Bowie's actually covered the title track on this, Night Flights, on his Black Tie White Noise album. This is excellent. I love the Scott Walker songs on this. I almost in a way wish all the songs were Scott Walker, but the other ones are pretty good as well. It's just hard for them to live up to the Scott Walker songs. So saw Sam show this on his channel, decided to go for the reissue of this, and this pressing sounds amazing. I can't compare it to the original. I don't know what that sounds like, but easily one of the best reissues sound-wise that I've got. So that put me in a bit of a Bowie mood. So then I got Ziggy Stardust. This is the motion picture soundtrack, which is basically the live last show ever of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. And quite famously at this show, and you'll see in the gatefold here, there's quite a bit on news articles where it was Bowie announced at the show that was the last show for the Spiders from Mars. Apparently the band didn't know about that and caught them by surprise. Some of the news articles thought that it meant Bowie was retiring from performing, which obviously he didn't, and he wasn't referring to that. He was just saying this is the last show for the Spiders from Mars and Ziggy Stardust, which it was. So this is a good set of tracks, mainly from the Aladdin Sane, Ziggy Stardust albums, with a few thrown in there from Hunky Dory and Man Who Sold the World and Space Oddity as well. The sound quality on this is not pristine, not great, but I did want to get this because I'm a huge Bowie fan, and for, I guess it's historical importance. Okay. And then an album that got reissued in the last couple of months that I've been wanting for a while. Some original copies are going for some crazy money. Santana Supernatural. This, of course, includes Smooth and Maria Maria are the big tracks off of this, and I think he may have won a couple of Grammy Awards with this particular album. One of the personal, probably top 10 albums of all time for my brother-in-law. Then we have The Creation, We Are Painter Men. The Creation being a band back from the UK, I think the UK in the 60s. They sound very much like those mod bands back in the 60s. Early Who is definitely a reference point for this. And one of the songs on here, I think it's called Making Time, I could be wrong, was apparently a big song off the movie back in the 90s called Rushmore. So we have The Creation. And then another mod-influenced band with some punk thrown in. We have The Jam. Of course, this is led by Paul Weller, The Jam. This is The Jam's first album, In the City. And definitely quite a bit of punk energy on this particular album. Next, we have Patti Smith, Easter. I think this is Patti Smith's third album. So I've been looking for this for a while. I know the reissue's out there, but I found a nice clean copy on Discogs. So this is excellent. And then in the same order, Ned's Atomic Dustbin and their most popular album, Godfather. I've been wanting this for quite some time. This unfortunately hadn't been reissued, so I had to pay up a little bit for this. Of course, this was a big favorite of mine back in the 90s. Gray Cell Green, Kill Your Television were some of the more known tracks from here. I saw Ned's once in Toronto on a festival, which was a 4-band festival that was put on by the radio station CFNY 102.1 The Edge. I'm trying to remember the lineup. So I think it was Our Lady Peace, which was a very popular 90s Canadian band. Our Lady Peace followed by Elastica, who were very popular at the time, followed by Ned's Atomic Dustbin, who were co-headlining with Blur, and this was the only time I seen Blur. This was around the Park Life album. So Ned's Atomic Dustbin. I think an album from the late 80s, Kirsty MacColl, Kite, her most popular album. This is produced by her husband, Steve Lillywhite. It includes an amazing cover of the Kinks song Days, and this was actually the first time I heard the song Days. Kirsty MacColl very tragically was killed in a swimming accident where some guy unfortunately ran into her while she was swimming with his boat or whatever. I don't really know all the details, but but this is an amazing album. I recently got a single for the cover that she did of the Billy Bragg song "A New England," which is excellent. And I definitely want to get this. I've been hearing some bad things about the reissue of this album, so I went looking for an original copy. I think this is from 88, 89 period. A bit of a grail for me, Hawkwind and their album Do Re Mi Fa Sol La Ti Do. This is still with Lemmy on bass and I think 1 or 2 tracks on vocals. I've been wanting this Hawkwind album for a while. It hadn't been reissued, and I found a fairly clean copy of it, which I think most of the copies of this are pretty trashed because of the black cover and you know, coming with ring wear and stuff like that. Vinyl and sleeve is pretty clean on this particular one. Really happy to get this. A couple more albums, another great 90s classic, Sugar, Copper Blue, backed with the Beaster EP. So this is a twofer. Copper Blue, easily Sugar's most popular album. Of course, Sugar led by Bob Mould of Husker Du fame. Speaking of Bob Mould, his latest album from this year, Sunshine Rock. Quite a good album. I mean, I wouldn't put it up there with the Sugar or the Husker Du stuff, but it very hard, very energetic. He's found his form in the last few years, sounding more like Sugar, like he more than he's ever done in quite some time before that, where he was dabbling with some electronica stuff. So I heard a couple of tracks from this. There's some nice strings on here that meld really nicely with the heavy guitars. So I was happy to get this Bob Mould, Sunshine Rock. And last but not least, the last album that I needed from Husker Du. This is Candy Apple Grey. This was Husker Du's first album on a major label, Warner Brothers. It includes the, I guess the hit song, Don't Wanna Know If You Are Lonely, which I first became familiar with when Catherine Wheel covered it. This album, again, like most Husker Du albums, is split between the Grant Hart songs and the Bob Mould songs, but they fit really, really well together. Husker Du, of course, was getting sort of more alternative sounding than punk sounding on their later albums, and that's certainly the case here on this major label debut. Okay, bit of a long video, guys, but thanks for hanging out with me, and we'll see you next time.